Jordan's signature move was the fadeaway. Kareem had the skyhook.
Skyhook up and good.
And Hakeem did the dream shake.
Inside. The dream shake.
Bill Laimbeer's signature moves were elbowing, hip checking, planting feet in the opponent's landing area, and flopping after the slightest contact. They called him the Prince of Darkness, the Axe Murderer, his Heinous, and the Darth Vader of the n.b.a. Laimbeer put the bad in the bad boy Pistons.
I don't believe this. Laimbeer gets in a fight seemingly once a week.
Everybody hated his guts, and most of his opponents still hate him today.
You never really liked Laimbeer in any social situation.
No.
Yeah.
It's because he was a dirty player.
However, despite his well-deserved bad boy reputation, Bill Laimbeer isn't just some fist-swinging brute who punched people because he couldn't really play. In the 80s, Laimbeer was the best defensive rebounder in the n.b.a, and he was one of the first centers that could make threes and was a better free throw shooter than Michael Jordan. He was also super smart, and the majority of his antics were thought out and served a purpose to distract his opponents. I don't fight. I agitate, then walk away. So, how good was Bill Laimbeer actually? And was he really the dirtiest player in n.b.a. history? And to answer that question, we need to go back to 1957 when Laimbeer was born. Bill Laimbeer Sr. was the president of a big glass manufacturing company, and his son Bill Jr. had an easy life, living in the richest parts of Chicago and Los Angeles. When he started playing in the n.b.a, he joked that he was the only player in the n.b.a. with a worse salary than his father. But there were benefits and pitfalls to Laimbeer's privileged upbringing. Bill was always super confident, and he believed he'd be super successful in any profession. It just so happened that basketball was his calling, especially after he reached 6'11" and led his high school to a state championship. However, Bill was also spoiled and used to everything coming to him easily. As a freshman at Notre Dame, Laimbeer flunked out and had to attend a technical college for 2 semesters to get his grades back up, which stopped his basketball career for a year and a half. And when he did return to Notre Dame's lineup for his junior and senior years, he didn't impress. Just 7 points and 6 rebounds per game didn't leave anybody in awe. So it wasn't surprising when he dropped to the 3rd round of the 1979 n.b.a. draft as the 65th overall pick by the Cavaliers. The Cavs weren't exactly thrilled with Bill for several reasons. Laimbeer wasn't particularly fast or athletic, and he wasn't a good post-up player. While all the great n.b.a. centers had polished post moves and could make shots over both shoulders, Laimbeer didn't want to be like them, and he wanted to shoot jumpers like guards. The Cavs were reluctant to even offer Bill a contract, and when they finally did, some 2 months after he got drafted, he had already signed another deal with Brescia in Italy. And in Europe, Laimbeer thrived, averaging 21 points and 12 rebounds for one season, after which he returned to the n.b.a. at the age of 23. And as a rookie, Bill did fairly well, averaging 10 points and 8 rebounds for Cleveland, despite being second in the n.b.a. in personal fouls. And when he played against Detroit, the Pistons GM Jack McCluskey noticed that the Cavs center played harder than anyone and fought for the entire game, even though it was a blowout. Impressed by Laimbeer's toughness, McCluskey traded for him at the next trade deadline, where he would team up with the rookie Isaiah Thomas. And when he got to the Motor City, Laimbeer blossomed. In the 1982-83 season, his first full season as a Piston, Laimbeer made the All-Star team, averaging 14 points and 12 rebounds per game. But back in those days, his reputation was far from what it became several years later.
You know, when Laimbeer first came to the Pistons, early on in his career, like guys was just turning around and literally taking their fist and punching him right in the face. And only years later, after taking so many punches in the face, when he started to hit back, he realized, oh, these guys aren't as tough as I thought they were. But when he started hitting back, then it became a problem.
Isaiah Thomas said on the Bill Simmons podcast. And while you should take Isaiah's words with a grain of salt, because he's talking about his teammate of 13 years, there's definitely some truth to his words. But despite all the hits he took, Bill was a fierce competitor, and he didn't want to miss a single game. He missed just 9 games during his career, mostly due to suspension. Still, in 1984, Laimbeer was still not the most hated athlete in America, and the Pistons were this fun, up-and-coming team that nobody took seriously. But that would soon change, because that season, Chuck Daly became the head coach and immediately brought results. Detroit had the best offense in the n.b.a., and after 7 long years, they finally made the playoffs. Laimbeer was an all-star for the 2nd consecutive season, with 17 points and 12 rebounds per game, shooting an excellent 53% from the field and 87% from the free throw line. However, despite a great season, the Pistons lost in the first round to the Knicks and Bernard King, who averaged an unreal 42.6 points per game game, which was the second highest scoring average in a series ever at the time. And even though they lost, it was clear that the Pistons were on the rise. With a young team, 2 All-Stars in Thomas and Laimbeer just entering their prime, and a great head coach, the future was bright for Detroit. In 1985, they added Vinnie Johnson, who would prove to be a pivotal bench player, and the Pistons finally won in the playoffs for the first time since 1976, sweeping the Nets in the first round.
To Jaminski, top of the key for the pop. Oh, it's over. The Pistons have swept New Jersey.
Still, in the second round, against the mighty Celtics in their prime, Detroit fought a good fight, but the Celtics were a much better, deeper, and more experienced team, advancing in 6 games. In Game 3 of that series, Robert Parrish elbowed Laimbeer in the face, and when Bill came up, Parrish punched him again for good measure.
Trapuka from the baseline. That won't go. Laimbeer is on the deck. And Laimbeer and Parrish have at it now.
Laimbeer certainly wasn't completely innocent, and the Celtics fans could argue that he had it coming. But still, it wasn't like Parrish was a sweetheart either. And this playoff series was the tipping point of the hatred between Laimbeer and the Celtics that would last for years on the court and still exists today. But in 1986, the Pistons GM McCluskey proved his brilliance once again, drafting shooting guard Joe Dumars and trading for Rick Mahorn, who was one of the most physical and hard-nosed big men in the league. Laimbeer struck gold with Mahorn because he finally had a big, strong guy to back him up and fight alongside him. That season, Laimbeer led the league in rebounding, averaging 13 boards per game, along with an efficient 16.5 points per game. However, the Pistons regressed, losing to the Hawks in the first round of the playoffs, despite Laimbeer averaging 22 and 14 in the series. In 1987, the Pistons traded Kelly Trapuka for a 2-time scoring champ Adrian Dantley and drafted forwards John Sally and Dennis Rodman to further strengthen the front court. And it worked. The Pistons won a franchise record 52 games, and Laimbeer made his 4th All-Star team with averages of 15 points, 12 rebounds, and an insane 89.4% free throw shooting, which was an NBA record for a center. Detroit breezed through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs.
All the way up. Go!
But in the Eastern Finals, they played another series for the ages against the Celtics. After Boston won the first 2 games, the Pistons won Game 3, largely because of Laimbeer. After a hard foul from Bill that sent Larry Bird to the ground, Larry couldn't stand it anymore and started punching Bill on the ground.
The 24-second clock goes down, and Bird and Laimbeer go at it.
After which, he got ejected, which secured the win for the Pistons. Detroit then won Game 4, and in Game 5 it looked like the Pistons would win, as they held a 1-point lead with 5 seconds left. Detroit also had possession of the ball, and all they had to do was inbound it when Isaiah made the costliest turnover of his career.
To Detroit. Bird steals it. Johnson. Layup. Boston. 1 second left.
Other than the Celtics' win and great play by Bird, this game will also be remembered for another fight between Parrish and Laimbeer. And once again, the Celtics center couldn't take Laimbeer's antics anymore, punching him 2 times.
The tip by Parrish. He can't get it to fall, and Parrish takes Laimbeer to the ground.
Even though he wasn't ejected from the game, Parrish was suspended for Game 6, and Detroit used his absence to force a Game 7.
And the Pistons are going to send this to a 7th game at Boston Saturday.
And even though Laimbeer indirectly won 2 games by taunting Bird and Parrish and getting them ejected, in Game 7, Bird pushed the Celtics to a close victory and another finals appearance, despite Detroit averaging 4 more points than Boston in that series.
The Boston Celtics will go to the finals again.
But because they were so close, Laimbeer and the Pistons entered the 1988 season hungrier and more dangerous than ever. Under Daly's direction, the Pistons adopted a philosophy of 94 feet defense, which meant full court pressing and defending the entirety of the court. Up until that time, most NBA teams ran back on defense and allowed the offensive team to cross half court unbothered. It was basically a gentleman's agreement, but the Pistons didn't care. Their whole strategy was to pressure, bump, and agitate, unlike any other team ever had, led by Laimbeer. As a result, they soon became the most disliked team in the NBA. While Detroit didn't lead the NBA in techs, they led the league in hip checks, forearms to the ribs, cheap cheap shots to the groin, shoving players midair, and fouls after the whistle. But the main reason why the Pistons were considered dirty was Bill Laimbeer, who continually put his feet in the players' landing areas after a jump shot, trying to injure the opponent, which made him arguably the most hated player in NBA history. But Bill and the Pistons weren't bothered by what others were saying, because their plan was working. Detroit won a franchise record 54 games, with the second best defense in the NBA, and when the playoffs came, their intensity was unmatched. The Pistons first defeated the Bullets and then gave Jordan his first playoff whooping in the second round.
Jordan. Clobbered. And that's what we're talking about when the Pistons want to make Jordan pay.
Which led to another showdown with Boston. The Celtics had made the finals 4 years in a row at that point, and despite their core getting older, they were still the favorites against Detroit. So, to get into Boston's head, Laimbeer would be the first Piston to go out on the floor. He'd walk up to the leprechaun logo, spit on it, and smear his spit with his sneakers, which brought the arena to the brink of madness. But this time, the Celtics could do nothing to punish his antics, as the Pistons finally managed to beat Boston in 6 games.
Hail to the new Eastern Conference Kings, the Detroit Pistons finally.
31 years it took them.
And in their first NBA Finals, Detroit squared up against another 80s dynasty, the LA Lakers. Even though the Pistons were the underdog, after 5 games they were leading 3-2. But then, a disaster. Isaiah Thomas stepped on Michael Cooper's foot and severely sprained his ankle.
Isaiah Thomas is hurt down on the court underneath the basket. I couldn't tell what happened.
It looked like his season was over. But then, despite being unable to stand on one leg, Thomas produced one of the craziest performances in NBA history. Isaiah miraculously kept playing. And not only did he play, he dominated.
Thomas here in the third. Thomas off balance. Basket counts and a foul as he goes into the first row, and he is still limping.
Thomas scored 25 points in the third quarter alone and finished the game with 43 points and 8 assists, keeping the Pistons afloat the entire game. With half a minute to go, Detroit was up by 1, and the Lakers went with a safe bet, deciding to throw the ball to Kareem to try to win the game with his trademark skyhook. But as Kareem was attempting the shot, the refs called a phantom foul on Laimbeer, who barely touched him.
Kareem. The old man goes up. This is the shot that goes to the line with 14 seconds to go and a chance to give the Lakers the lead.
To make things worse, Kareem also traveled before the act of shooting, but the refs rejected all protests from the Pistons and sent Jabbar to the line. Kareem made both free throws and the Lakers had the lead. And after Dumars missed a layup on the other end, Los Angeles survived and forced a Game 7. In the deciding Game 7, the Pistons again had a chance to win, but with the hobbled Isaiah, the Lakers survived their late attempts and Detroit lost the championship.
The game ends. The Lakers have won it again.
After the NBA Finals, the NBA video department issued a VHS cassette with highlights for each team, and someone named the '88 Pistons video The Bad Boys. When Isaiah Thomas heard what the NBA had titled the team video, he wasn't offended. He just gave the reporters his trademark smirk and said, "I guess we are the Bad Boys." Soon enough, the whole team embraced this nickname. Even the franchise started selling Bad Boy merchandise. And if you thought the Pistons were dirty and physical up to that point, they were even worse in 1989. Detroit threw more punches than anybody, and if you wanted to score at the basket, you knew you were going to suffer a blow from Rodman, Mahorn, or Laimbeer. And Laimbeer became the complete opposite of the prototype NBA center. He was always allergic to having his back to the basket and rejected the notion of developing a low post game. So, rather than change Laimbeer, the Pistons ultimately adapted their game plan to his strengths. Even though he shot threes before, the 1989 season was the first time he averaged more than 1 3-point attempt per game, making them at a decent 35% clip. He was one of the very few pick-and-pop centers in the NBA, and due to his shooting prowess, the opposing center was forced to guard him outside the paint, which freed up driving lanes for Thomas and Dumars. The Pistons won a franchise record 63 games that season, and in the first round of the playoffs, they swept their arch-enemies from Boston, who played without an injured Larry Bird. And after they swept the Bucks in the second round, came another clash with Michael Jordan and his Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals. Because Jordan was by far the best player in the NBA,
He kept it in bounds. Here it is again. Oh, yes!
Chuck Daly knew that if they wanted to win, they had to put all their effort into stopping MJ. So Daly invented the Jordan rules, a set of guidelines on how to guard Michael and stop him any way they could, legally or illegally.
Don't give him
some easy field goals. Make it tough. Make it tough. No easy field goals. It's the only way we're going to get the lead back. No easy field goals.
By the end of the series, Jordan probably ended up taking more licks than field goals scored, and the Bulls simply couldn't match the Pistons' aggressiveness. Detroit won the series in 6 games and secured another finals clash with the Lakers. And in the finals, Lady Luck finally smiled at Detroit. After Byron Scott got injured in Game 1, the Lakers also lost Magic Johnson in Game 3.
And we have our first tie of the game, and Magic Johnson may have pulled a hamstring.
And with Kareem being 41 years old, the Lakers didn't stand a chance.
Rodman from Thomas. How about that pass?
The Pistons swept them in the finals, and for the first time ever became the NBA champions.
The Pistons are the basketball champions of the world!
In 1990, due to the expansion draft, the Pistons couldn't keep Rick Mahorn. But that only meant more minutes for Rodman, who won his first Defensive Player of the Year award. Despite his running mate Mahorn gone, Laimbeer continued to excel in extracurricular activities on the court, getting into fights with several opposing players, namely Charles Barkley, who hated Laimbeer more than anybody outside of Boston. And even though the Pistons were average in almost every statistical category, they played unselfish basketball and were willing to die for one another on the court, which resulted in 59 wins and another number 1 seed. In the playoffs, they once again gave Jordan a beating, defeating the Bulls in 7 games to reach their 3rd consecutive NBA Finals. This time they played the Blazers, and almost every game in the finals was close. After 2 games, the series was tied, and in order to motivate his teammates before Game 3, Laimbeer deliberately ran over a photographer when leaving the tunnel. But because of their experience and tenacity, the Pistons beat the Blazers in the clutch of each game, and Laimbeer's 17 rebounds in the deciding Game 5 likely swung the series in Detroit's favor, and they won their 2nd NBA title.
There's the shot. The Pistons are winners and still champions of the world.
And even though Thomas was the finals MVP, it was really Laimbeer who got to the Blazers. Throughout the series, Portland's big men were so frustrated by Laimbeer's illegal screens, defensive charges, and not to mention his usual holding, grabbing, and kicking when the refs weren't looking, he completely threw them off their game. For the 1991 season, Laimbeer averaged 2 3-pointers per game, making them at 36% efficiency. However, his overall numbers started to decline. Detroit also lost a bit of steam, winning only 50 games in the regular season, and barely winning their first 2 playoff matchups against Atlanta and Boston. Still, the Pistons reached another conference finals against the Bulls. But this time, Jordan and Chicago were ready for the Pistons' aggression and cheap fouls. They were younger, hungrier, and better, sweeping Detroit 4-0 and announcing the start of their dynasty. Before the final game was over, Laimbeer and the rest of the Pistons left the bench and walked past the Bulls in silence, not shaking their hands. It was one of the most memorable team decisions in NBA history, universally hated everywhere outside of Detroit.
Pistons wasting no time in getting out of here. They left the bench, although there's 7 and 9 seconds remaining. The Pistons just left.
And that Pistons walk-off was also symbolic, because it was the beginning of the end for the Bad Boys. In 1992, the Pistons lost in the first round, and in 1993, they didn't even make the playoffs. And as their careers were reaching an end, at the beginning of the 1994 season, the longest-tenured Pistons, Thomas and Laimbeer, had a big fight. Laimbeer fouled Isaiah hard in a practice for the 2nd time in 2 weeks, leading Thomas to punch Laimbeer in retaliation, breaking his hand in the process. Everybody in the NBA was thrilled. Scott Skiles said that Isaiah couldn't have picked a better guy to punch, while Clyde Drexler responded that Laimbeer was a cheap shot artist and that he won't ever change, even for his teammates. Karl Malone said that if he ever had to play like Laimbeer, he'd quit the NBA, which is pretty rich coming from a guy who elbowed more people than anybody. However, Isaiah and Laimbeer were great friends, and they reconciled shortly after the incident. But in the aftermath of the punch, realizing that Isaiah's absence would kill the team's chances of making the playoffs and his own declining form, Laimbeer decided to retire 11 games into the season at the age of 36. So, how good was Laimbeer actually? And was he really the dirtiest player ever? The answer to the first question was given by Laimbeer himself. In one interview, he said that he always knew that he didn't have the talent of Kareem or Moses Malone, but what he had, he used to the fullest. Despite a minuscule vertical leap, and fairly slow feet, Laimbeer combated that by becoming a master of positioning and anticipating, which made him an excellent rebounder and help defender. He's the third best free throw shooter ever amongst centers. He was a willing passer, and if he played in the modern era with more shooting, Laimbeer would certainly average more points.
To Isaiah, trapped in backcourt, long lob to Billy. He'll square up and gun left wing. It goes! Bill Laimbeer has 10,000 career points.
A four-time All-Star, Laimbeer became the 19th player in league history to amass more than 10,000 points and 10,000 rebounds, and his 25% defensive rebounding rate currently ranks 34th all-time. And as far as his dirty play, you're damn right that Laimbeer crossed the line sometimes. But Bill was always pretty honest and level-headed about that, too. My job was to make sure you focused on me and didn't mess with our guards. We're in the entertainment business, and you want to give the fans what they want. If they want great plays, they look for Isaiah Thomas. If they want steady plays, they look for Joe Dumars. If they want comic relief, they look for me. Laimbeer was the perfect heel for the NBA, an anti-hero who the crowds loved to hate. But it's undeniable that he was popular and put butts in seats. A longtime Pistons announcer, George Blaha, said this: Laimbeer rarely hit anyone, he just drove them nuts. He delighted in getting under your skin. He constantly was trying to gain not only the physical edge, but also the mental edge. If he could make you lose your concentration, then he'd won, because he never seemed to lose his cool. And most of his opponents share the same sentiment, like Kurt Rambis. I respect the guy. He'll do anything, whether it's flopping to get a call or agitating someone to get them out of their game. You gotta give him credit. We're not out here to win popularity contests. Everybody tries to do a little holding, grabbing, intimidating. But I don't think he's dirty. He simply does whatever it takes to win. And whether you like Laimbeer or not, you gotta respect him. He was a millionaire from birth, and yet he played every game like his life depended on it. Even though he threw a lot of cheap shots over the years, he received plenty back. And despite plenty of broken noses, cheekbones, and multiple other injuries, Laimbeer always showed up, missing just 9 total games in his entire career, always ready to help his teammates win games. Was Bill the dirtiest player ever? Probably, but he's far from the only master in the dark arts. He just happened to be the best at it, and played in an era perfectly suited for his antics. But Laimbeer never really cared how he'd be remembered anyway. The only people I care about are my teammates, my family, and my friends. People can say whatever they want about the type of game I play, but there's no denying that I'm a winner. They have to say that I'm a winner, a world champion. Thanks for watching.